I'd like to share with you a process that I've developed called the yes or no phenomenon. It derives from the Sermon on the Mount in the New Testament, where the master of Christianity is talking about truth. And in this part of the sermon, as he's talking about how logic can really mislead us or cannot take us to understanding about ourselves and our human relatedness and relationships with each other and with ourselves, mentions that in terms of really discovering truth, he said, simply put, say yes or no, everything else comes from evil. Evil means, in this context, lies, deceptions, falsehoods. From the spiritual point of view, the world is divided into two. That is, a divine world, a spiritually based world, and a man-made world grafted on it, in which human beings author their own laws and believe that those laws are the appropriate ones to live by, and that they supersede any of the cosmic laws that have existed prior to the creation of the earth. In the Western tradition, the laws that I mentioned, these what you call in our tradition the 10 laws, or the 10 cosmic laws, or the 10 commandments, preceded the creation of the world. This was the glue, the basis for living a lawful life in relationship with each other, bringing people into connection in a lawful way. We're changing the laws of the struggle for existence and natural selection to the laws of collaboration. And these are the collaborative laws that allow us to live in this time-space dimensional reality with each other in a lawful way, sharing, caring, giving, and bringing to bear the force, the great healing force that's given to us from the spiritual life, which is called love. So in this yes or no, he's saying that what's in front of you is what is you're asked to make a choice about. And it's a derivative of what I've mentioned that took place in Deuteronomy, when God said to the people, I set before you at every moment life and death, good and evil, choose. And so the choice is before us to yes or no. We don't need to know in spiritual life where it's going, what the outcome will be, what the result will be, what the consequence will be. We don't have to predict it. We don't have to know where it's going. It's a major difference between spiritual understanding and what we might call normative understanding or logical understanding, man-made world understanding, or the conventional way of understanding the world, which is always predicated on wanting to know the outcome of something before I go and do it. I want to know if it's right or wrong, good or bad, so on and so forth, and having to force ourselves into that direction of wanting to know where things will be in the future is a great source of the disturbances that infiltrate into our lives. It's one of the main reasons that we become ill and we end up shortening our own lifespan. We'll get into it much further as we move along. So yes or no is different, as I mentioned, from yes and no, in which you're staying in an ambivalent state, and that already stops you and freezes you and makes your life rigid in every way, morally, socially, mentally, emotionally, physically. What I discovered is the relationship between these yes or no on this mental level and emotional level, all these levels I mentioned, and your physical level. And it came to me as a revelation, and I've seen it take place because constantly in people suffering, because I'm interested in it, because I explore it, because I understand there's a wholeness, there's a reflection. The healthcare model of the ancient world, the spiritual healthcare model, is a reflection model. It is a reflection between the physical, the emotional, the mental, social, and moral. They're all working together in conjunction. They're reflecting each other, and they're acting one upon the other, so that if we can intervene in one area and reverse it, then the other areas will follow suit. See, so the beauty of it is we can enter into it not only just physically, but through other venues as well. Which the conventional model, which is a cause and effect model, or what's called a deterministic model, a logical model, cannot accept or integrate or understand. So what happens to us physically? The first cervical vertebrae in the spinal column is called the atlas, and the atlas is the bone that allows you to nod your head or shake your head yes. You can shake your head yes. I'd like everybody to do that. The second cervical vertebrae is called the axis, and the axis allows you to shake your head or nod your head no, and I'd like everybody to do that. Okay, so now you're forming a perfect, if you will, a perfect cross. Yes and no, right? Yes, no. Okay, now what I'd like you all to do is to say to yourself yes and no, the function of doubt, of indecision. I'd like you all to do it at one time. Yes and no together. So do yes and no. And I know what's happened to you as you're doing this. You're starting to feel disoriented. You're feeling confused. You're feeling unsettled, sort of at odds with yourself now. You see what's happening is that you're putting your cervical vertebrae out of joint. And now there's a derangement that's beginning to happen in the vertebral column, which is a significant physical source of difficulties, because what comes out of the spinal column are nerves from the spinal cord. And these nerves that come out of the spinal cord innervate our organs. And they innervate not only the organs, but they innervate the arteries, and so all the nutrient channels get to be blocked because as the spinal column becomes deranged through this alteration, which not only just it starts in the axis, the atlas and the axis, but as it goes out of joint, the whole vertebral column will begin to go out of joint to compensate for the difficulty and the disturbance in the first two cervical vertebrae. And then you'll get, as we see, over 100 million Americans with back trouble, and with a very common process that's known as scoliosis, which is born with curvature of the spinal column. And we get curves in the spinal column of all sorts, and people are hunched over and they're bent over, and as they get, and it's part of the aging process, they get old and they lose their stability and ability to maneuver and so on, and become more and more rigid. You see the relationship between what you're doing to yourself mentally and what you're doing to yourself physically. That's what has been called in common parlance the mind-body connection. And we see it as this integrative whole that has come into disorder through the simple process of not saying yes or no in your situation. So a person will come to me and will talk to me about wanting to get married to this person, and we'll talk endlessly about it until I finally said to the person, do you want to marry her, yes or no? And he said yes. And that started the process where he ended up marrying her.